All right, Hacksters, welcome to Tuesday. It is my favorite day of the week where we get to talk to awesome people doing cool stuff with hardware. And someone doing incredibly cool stuff and really groundbreaking, interesting things with hardware is Ben Krasnow, aka the creator of Applied Science, the YouTube channel. Good morning, Ben. What's up?
Hello, how's it going?
Not bad. I'm really stoked because something that I love about your channel is that you're really digging into sort of the physical nuts and bolts of what builds electronics and really sort of building stuff up from scratch all the time. So, I can't wait to ask you some questions.
Yeah,
Would you like to tell people really quickly what your channel is sort of all about?
yeah, sure. I run the Applied Science channel on YouTube, and have been doing that for about 10 years, or even close to 11 now. And it started as just a very small channel back in the days, and as YouTube grew, I sort of grew in subscriber base, and it's almost, or I guess over 750,000 subscribers now.
Woo!
But it's still a hobby, so I still have a day job, and the YouTube channel is just where I get to do projects for fun and just explore things kind of without timelines or guide rails or stuff, which is, kind of fun to work that way.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite ones that you've done? You actually just published a blog post and video about sort of your favorite project from 10 years of applied science. And I think it's really interesting. You started out not doing all electronic stuff. Would you like to tell us where you came from?
Yeah, so this you can see the cake making video there. So the first videos that I ever published to YouTube were not electronics or tech related at all, and so I made some cakes. And the reason that I published it is because at the time there was just no good resource for making these fondant cakes, right? Like there was a lot of, maybe professional information, but there just wasn't that many how-to videos back in the day. And so sort of the genesis for the idea of putting videos on the internet was just showing things that you couldn't find elsewhere, basically doing things and explaining things in a way that would be accessible to a lot of people. So that applies to cake making as it does to tech, I guess.
Yeah, and so this was sort of 10 years ago when you were starting out doing this. Um, what's Obviously things have kind of changed in the meantime. We've got Instructables, we've got Hackster, we've got Hackaday, we've got all these places where you can find tutorials, but also you seem to get a lot of your ideas and information from like scientific papers and journals and things. So where do you look now that you weren't able to look 10 years ago?
Yeah, it's true. The ability to search around is better. So, for example, Google Patents makes it a lot easier to search patents, and that was, super difficult before then. And then things like Sci-Hub actually changed a lot too. Now you can basically find any scientific paper and read the entire thing in a minute. Whereas before Sci-Hub, you had to shell out, $35 a pop, which means basically you would never read any of them. So, people say, well, it's not fair. I mean, that's illegal. You're pirating, but it actually dramatically changes the way information flows to people if you can just read any science paper you want. So I get a lot of ideas from cruising Sci-Hub.
And from the author's perspective, even I've read a lot of authors saying that they're happy to send their research to people if you just DM them for their PDFs or whatever. They want that information to be out there. It's really just sort of this artificial bottleneck.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes finding the research is tricky, or you're just looking for research that's so old, the research have retired or moved on or something. But yeah, it's true. For current stuff, they're more than happy to send it to you.
Right, that reminds me of some stuff that the Internet Archive does, which is preserving preserving information and games and things that are on archaic forms of media that just no one would have access to it now. It doesn't matter if it's under copyright or not. Do you play at all with older sort of retro forms of tech? You're often doing like really new stuff and things that like, I haven't seen anyone do this from scratch. Like an LCD or your DSKY EL display, which is incredible, which we'll look at in a second, maybe. But yeah, what kinds of retro tech have you played around with or tried to resurrect or upgrade?
It's a good question. Actually, I haven't really done a huge amount of retro tech, but there is a project brewing. Curious Mark has a channel who actually lives
Hmm.
local here, and he does Apollo era restorations. You've probably seen some of the videos with like Apollo radio restorations. And he has
Ooh.
a lot of friends that have a lot of Apollo era and just a huge amount of like space, uh, you know, original equipment that's been saved from lunar exploration programs and stuff. And so we have access to an Apollo fuel cell, like the real fuel cell that they built for Apollo. And we were talking about getting that running again. This would
No
take
way!
high pressure hydrogen and oxygen and make electricity and water. So that would be a cool retro tech. It's
What?
on my list, but that's a big one that's coming up maybe at some point.
Cool. And you have this, as I mentioned, this disky display that you kind of recreated, which is an Apollo display. Let's pull that up.
Yeah,
Here we
actually,
go.
I even brought a little
Oh, no
demo.
way!
Well, I actually brought something else. I figured everyone had seen the Disky, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but I did bring a little EL thing here. Let's see. There we go.
Ooh!
So it's this was from the year that I did copper printed circuits on a piece of plastic, and so the idea was that you could 3D print a plastic part and then deposit copper and EL displays on it in this process. So you could have like custom displays and custom circuitry on a flat part, all in one sort of substrate. It's kind of cool.
Wow, yeah. Ah, there's you seem to make circuits out of a lot of weird stuff. You got this like depositing copper on plastic. I've been freaking out recently over this one that you are doing. This is not it. Here we go. But laser cutting ceramic, aluminum ceramic, and depositing silver onto it and sintering that to make your own circuits. What's the weirdest thing you've made a circuit with?
Yeah, I thought we would talk about interesting substrates. I actually brought that little thing too,
Ah!
and it's still going, so that's nice. It is actually a pretty reliable little circuit.
Wow. You made a lot of a huge point about it being, high temperature resistant and having these other useful characteristics, but honestly, I think it's also just beautiful.
Yeah.
Like, look at this.
Yeah, that's a better shot of it.
It's
Yeah,
oh,
it's so the reason that this came up is because at work we needed boards that would not outgas in sort of really sensitive systems. So we have a
ah,
like a gas detector, and even epoxy FR4 is actually really good. It's much better than people might think, but it still outgasses chemicals that interfere with our system. So the nice thing is
mm,
about ceramic and silver, there's just nothing here to outgas. You can cook this up to kiln temperatures, and when it cools down, it's just perfectly clean.
wow. So it kind of interplays with your daily work that you're doing, and you work at at Verily, is that right?
Yep.
Could you tell us a bit about what that is and what your day-to-day is kinda like?
Yeah. So Verily is one of one of Google's or Alphabet's life science companies. So along the years, they've had a few different health efforts, but Verily's been the biggest and the longest running. And so we're actually a separate company that's just owned by Alphabet. And the goal here is to proactively do healthcare. So spending a little bit more time and money earlier in a disease progression often
Mm.
saves money and produces better outcomes. So we're all about sensors and tech to discover what it looks like to start becoming unhealthy so that you can intervene more quickly.
Ah, that'd be amazing. I feel like we also need to fix our, like, healthcare the way that we fund that stuff in order to encourage people to seek treatment earlier. Oh, boy. But it's cool to see it from the technical side as well. We have some fun, uh, comments here. Chris says, "I wonder if you could sinter tungsten in place of silver there for an even higher temp. I wonder if that would have, like, circuit characteristics or what?"
They actually, yeah, for really, really high temperature applications, they have high temperature co-fired ceramic boards, which I think use maybe platinum as the metal, just so that
Whoa.
it's stable at high temperatures, maybe or something. These were sintered at 950 degrees C, but at that temperature, the silver is sintering. So the operational temperature of this would only be like 700 or 800 or something C. But
Only
this,
for the
the
real.
solder would have melted a long time ago. So you need some other, technique to connect to it if you're going to go that hot.
There's some really interesting stuff you've done with mixing it with oh, I've forgotten what video this was now, but, like, just using glass as glue. Was that in this one as well? You're using silver and glass bead
Yeah,
powder and
exactly.
what?
I know it's that was another one where like no one ever talks about this. Like if you want to make your own circuit board, no one really says what the ratio is, or you have to go digging around in the patents, and
Uh-huh.
they do their best to sort of cover as much as possible. So they'll say, anywhere between 0.1% and 10%. But it's like, well, which I mean, it's a pretty big range. So you
Yeah.
just have to kind of test it out and figure out what works best. And the amount of glass is super, super small. I forget what I ended up with. I think 1% or something. And so you screen this thing on here, and it's 99% silver powder and 1% glass powder. But that glass is enough to get it to all stick together.
Mm. Mohib is jumping in with what about Vegemite? I've actually made a circuit with Marmite on a quesadilla once, but, Mohib, you probably knew that. Um, we have a question about the RF properties of ceramic circuit boards. You do mention this at the start of your video, but I'm not sure that you've actually played with that.
Yeah, some people use them for the RF properties, and so the dielectrics are more consistent across frequency ranges than epoxy. And depending,
Ah.
it might be better controlled. Like it might have a lower temperature coefficient, or just the thickness of the board might be more controllable. So the really high-end RF applications might want ceramic as well.
Interesting. So I don't want to get too stuck on like one particular project. You've already recently done a really amazing video on this, and everyone should check it out. In fact, let's pull that up. Doo, 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 doo. It's no, I keep doing the wrong one. This one, underwater laser cutting and silver sintering to make ceramic circuit boards. But back on uh, asking a little bit about you have this a day job where you work at Verily, and it seems to interplay with your hobby a bit. Um, you've mentioned in one or two of your videos where it would be interesting to like if you were going to make a huge run of a project, then you would maybe use a different technique. But as far as I know, you haven't actually productized anything for your like in your own independent right. And I'm curious if you've ever thought about that, and if so, what you would choose.
Yeah, that's a good question. No, I haven't done any products outside, mainly because the day job is pretty time consuming.
Mm,
When I was part of Google, employers don't want you working on stuff that might interfere with your day job. So when I was
mm.
part of Google, it was actually more restrictive because Google basically does everything from robotics to, at the time, self-driving
Oh my
cars,
gosh, yeah.
healthcare, software, everything, balloons. So it basically encompassed almost all tech projects being at Google. But now that I'm focused on healthcare at work, stuff outside of that, of course, is outside the purview. One thing that I've been thinking about doing is an Osh Park type service for
Oh,
etched metal parts.
oh.
Um, there's these etched metal parts vendors, and they're all very expensive and very slow and geared toward very high end customers. But it would really be nice to have a very simple kind of mail order thing where you just upload your CAD and get your cheap parts, in a couple of weeks. And so that's something I think I will do at some point.
Ah, this is really interesting. It kind of ties into something Mohib brought up, which is that like you have this huge focus on things being like doing sort of the affordable version of something, the DIY version of something, like how to build your own functional spacecraft with parts from Ace Hardware and some chemicals I found in a cabinet. And obviously, like over the years, you've kind of built up such that you can have any number of weird things in your cabinet. I'm curious what some of the weirdest things you have in your cabinet are.
Some of the weirdest things, huh? That's interesting. I don't know about weird. Let's see.
Maybe most specialized.
Specialized.
I don't know.
Um, there's a lot of weird chemicals out there just because you have to buy something for one project, and so it's not like I sat down and stocked a chemistry lab, from a blank sheet of paper. So the
Sure.
chemicals out there are kind of all over the place just to sort of make gaps wherever I kind of needed that chemical. So that's kind of a weird collection of stuff.
Mm.
Um,
I imagine for metal etching, you'd use a bunch of weird ones, or like often people are doing brass or copper etching for making circuits, for making circuit boards, or even just like aesthetically doing glass etching and things like that. Um, and you've done laser etching, obviously, but what are some of the other things that you would be etching into if you started your own little service?
yeah, stainless steel is pretty popular.
Oh yeah,
For structural reasons, it's pretty good, and obviously it doesn't rust, and so that's pretty good. And so if you kind of standardized on a few different thicknesses or something, you could let people choose whether they want stainless or brass, and maybe a few different sizes each, and then kind of start with that as the minimal product. But the nice thing is that the chemicals needed to do this etching business are pretty okay, like pretty
mm,
benign. You need ferric chloride to etch the metal, but
right.
all of the developer and the photoresist, those are all water-based chemicals. It's just washing soda. And so there's no nasty hydrocarbon solvents that you have to deal with. And it actually makes it a lot easier to do that business in a small shop.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Ooh, we have a question from Muriz who says you've done a few carvids in the past, and we've seen the little toy Tesla sitting in the back. Are any more carvids in the pipeline? Lots of love from Wales.
Yeah, that's a good point. So that little car is still in my shop. In fact, I trip over it all the time because it's big and on the ground. And I've been meaning to get back to it. So the idea was that I would build the car with enough acceleration power to match my real Tesla in a 1 second race.
Oh my gosh.
So the little car would have to produce 1 g of longitudinal acceleration for 1 second. So it'd go from 0 to about 25 or 30 miles an hour in 1 second. And I calculated, it was kind of an interesting engineering problem. Like you'd need this much power to the motors and the tires would have to produce this much traction. And I was going to show how torque and power relate. And this all might still happen. But I blew up the motor controller and then kind of, I don't know, just sort of let the project slide for a while. But it's that might be a good one to go back to.
Ooh, blowing up the motor controller on the I was just watching the Disky one last night, which is why this is so much on my mind, but, you did a lot of blowing up chips in that one as well, and it seemed like there was a really frustrating, um, test process and prototyping process and troubleshooting how that worked. I'm curious, like, what are some of the more, like, interesting or exciting, screw-ups that you've run into?
Yeah, I think one thing that's helpful for viewers to know is that like a lot of the videos I show are more or less replications of things that other people have already figured out. Like for example, that video that I just made about Alestra, I was essentially
Right.
just following the recipe that was in the patent, even though it's still fairly difficult to do that because there's lots of details that um, someone like me wouldn't know just from reading the patent. It's not detailed enough to follow it exactly the first time you read it. But there have been a few times in the past where I was actually just going completely off script. And so the copper deposition on plastic project was where I just went completely off and just tried to make my own chemistry, just thinking about basic principles. And then your speed of progress goes down to like almost zero. So I spent, weeks and weeks and weeks trying to get that to work at all. And it was actually fairly happy with the result. But it's just those are much rarer projects because they require just way, way more work and poking around in the dark rather than following a patent or a research paper.
Yeah, it seems like you have a pretty good handle on time management and just not feeling this pressure to constantly produce, which I think is, if people among YouTubers, it seems like there's this sort of suck that you can get into, like a vortex where it's like I have to be producing something new all the time. But the nature of your work is very like in depth and like delving and delving and delving and like trying and iterating something like a million times over. It's very impressive.
Actually, it's a good point. It does help that I have a day job. So if I was relying on YouTube for income, I suspect
Right.
my channel would look fairly different. But it also helps to remember that like not every video has to be like better than the last. Like it's very. I mean, sure you feel this too, being like a creative person, where you
Mm.
feel, wow, this project was great, and then for the next one I'm going to add this, and then for the next one, and you get into this kind of spiral where it's like you don't have to top yourself every time. Like it's really helpful to just think that some projects will be a little easier and a little simpler, and it's okay to kind of have variety in how you do it. I think one of Hank Green or one of the Green brothers said like, don't expect that every video is going to be like more successful or better or more impactful than the last. It's just no way to it's no way to go.
Yeah, and I wonder if it also comes from this aspect of being driven by curiosity, because again, you're not doing this, as your main revenue stream. It's sort of a love project, a passion project. And I think that, when you are a curious person, you can see all of these further possibilities and not even necessarily being driven by more views or whatever, but just seeing all the branching fractal ways that you could apply this same thing or adapt it for different uses. And it must get it seems kind of overwhelming for me. It's definitely overwhelming sometimes, and like that challenge alone, just sort of trying to top your last thing. Oh,
Yeah, it does help, and I actually don't really care if I have a billion subscribers or not. I'm very happy with having like a dedicated fan base that just sort of likes the style of what I do, and however many people that is, that will be fine. So, so I don't really need to try hard to sort of please the greatest number
yeah.
of people. It's just the people that already kind of like the style, basically.
Yeah, plus, as Timon says, "Hey, Timon," you're making exciting things more accessible to more people, and it's kind of like by publishing this stuff, you're making it so that other people can kind of pick that up where you've left off and sort of run with it as well. So maybe that takes some of the pressure off.
Yeah, I'm actually really happy with the comments section of my videos. Like people make fun of YouTube comments as being kind of a cesspool and stuff, but
Yeah.
I've always found the comments section to be very, very good. I read almost all of them.
Aw.
Sometimes I run out of time, but I almost read all of them. And I usually find new ideas from comments too. Some of my video ideas come from viewers that say, "Hey, have you ever thought about this?"
Hmm. Oh, well, we've definitely got people chiming in the comments here. It's very exciting. I had one thing that I wanted to was it? Oh dear. I've lost my train of thought because there's too much cool stuff going on. Um People running with your work. Let's just jump to another one. You've built a lot of different tools for yourself and machines for yourself. You built a forge, you built a single cookie creation machine.
Yeah.
I haven't actually watched that one, but you referenced it in this blog post of yours. And I'm curious, what would be the next tool that you would want to buy or build? Like maybe there's something that only exists super expensive and you would want to do your own or whatever.
Yeah, that's a good one. Fiber lasers have been on my mind for a while. So another really great channel, Breaking Taps, is good. And he's got a fiber laser among also a scanning electron microscope among a whole bunch of other really cool equipment. It's a great channel you should check out. But
Ooh.
I've been envious of these fiber lasers because they have such high power density. You can do things you can do with that you can't do with a CO2 laser. And so,
Mm.
yeah, pulsed lasers would be nice.
Whoa. This
And
looks
maybe
like it
even
was
just,
amazing.
yeah, and even like a video just about fiber lasers in general, like maybe even kind of building one just to kind of show how it works or something might be neat. Actually, that's a good
Yeah.
idea.
What's the obstruction there? Is it that they're super expensive or hard to do on your own or
Yeah,
power?
commercially they're pretty expensive. They were like CO2 lasers have hit, kind of the hobbyist level with a thing like a glow forge, but the fiber lasers are still in that weird space where it's either industrial or it's kind of like a low cost import model that generally works, but it's just
Mm,
not very common. So you're going to spend probably, I don't know, 2 to 5 thousand, I think, on a mid-grade fiber laser
that makes
etching machine
sense.
or something. So it's still a little out of the range.
And you've made other ones like, DIY water jet cutters, which are like those are incredibly expensive. I've, played around a little bit with those, but, like, just running the machine itself was incredibly expensive, and they have this, like, ruby or garnet grit that they use and stuff, and I think the grit isn't that expensive, but you've done your own water jet cutters with, like, a high power pressure washer. I wonder
Yeah.
a while down the road from building that, if you've used it more and if there's improvements or changes that you would make.
Yeah, I have to admit, some of these videos are just to show the technique. So as soon as the video was done for that water jet cutter, I dismantled it and
Ah!
haven't used it since. So I know I have to come clean. Like some of these machines aren't really for my use. They're more to show, for the video to exist. On the other hand, eventually I'm going to move into a larger shop. It's going to take years, but
Mm,
eventually I will. And in that case, maybe I'll have enough space to just keep things in their form, but as it is, I am somewhat space limited, so I just can't leave the stuff set up all the time.
that's a great point. Yeah, just having the space to you're limited by budget, you're also limited by time, and then also by the amount of space that you have to just, like, leave things laying around. It's kind of the same with some of my robots. I built them and then, like, I don't really use them all the time. Oh, but it's so cool that other people can, like, take inspiration from this and build their own maybe.
Yeah, there was a lot of comments in there that sounded like people were really going to try it, and honestly, it would work. I mean, if you want to cut things very occasionally, it's totally feasible to do it. It's not it wasn't a it wasn't a faked video or anything. You can actually use it.
Ha! That's so cool. Um, Another cool thing about this is that so in your, actual videos and stuff, in the descriptions, there isn't a ton of information necessarily, but you put a bunch of stuff on your blog as these extra resources and stuff, which I think is an extra really useful way that people can take that information and sort of run with it.
Yeah, it's generally copied from the description. I do try to do a good job
Oh.
of highlighting all of the sources, like all the Sci-Hub links, the
Oh, that's my
patents,
bad.
all that stuff. But um, I actually am surprised. Occasionally, people will comment like only on the blog, as if they
Huh.
were finding it. I don't know if they were discovering the video through the blog or something, but um, it's another Google product. Unfortunately, Google Google bought the Blogger a long time ago, and the maintenance on that thing is just absolutely atrocious. Like nobody blogs anymore, right? Like it's just a
Oh.
rare thing. And so the comment section and everything about that, the spam filtering is kind of broken, but I still post up there and people do comment on the blog posts. And so, I
Ah.
keep doing it. Yeah.
It's true, the landscape has kind of changed, so, we've got YouTube and blogs. I used to do a blog, that's how I started out in, like, 2009, and a lot of stuff I think happens now on Twitter and Instagram, and you mostly have this Twitter where people can sort of, keep up with what your latest projects are, what people are working on.
Yeah, exactly. It's true. And to be fair, it is kind of it's sort of better. Like if you wanted to post a picture and show it to people, it's just sort of easier to have it show up in someone's feed as opposed to them polling every blog. And there's RSS, I guess, but it's just it's just how the world happened.
I love this Soma FM sticker. It's a great radio station.
Yeah, I've been a Soma FM listener for a long time.
So we've got some people's ideas in the comments already. An intensifier pump would be a cool future project. What else are people saying?
I agree. In fact, the similar machining needed for an intensifier pump is going to be in my 100,000 psi espresso video, which is another one that's been in the works for a long time. But it requires it's like really high precision machining of a piston, super high pressures. Yeah, that one's been in the works for a long time.
Nice. Mohib asks if you've seen Alex Burkhan's electroplating PLA process.
No. It could be. Is that a spray carbon thing? I know one of the techniques out there is to spray your part with something conductive like carbon spray paint and then dunk it into a plating bath. And that actually works really great for a lot of things.
Cool. Matt suggests that you could power the little car off the Apollo fuel cell.
It's a lot of juice. Actually, believe it or not, the car would require more juice to accelerate it the way I want than even the Apollo fuel cell can deliver.
No way!
Yeah, it's I think it's maybe 1 or 2 kilowatts that you can get out of the Apollo fuel cell. But to achieve 1 G of acceleration in this little kid's car, it'll end up being 20 or 30 kilowatts, I think.
Oh my gosh.
The real Tesla requires maybe about 570 kilowatts when it's at peak power. So it's if you want to move fast quickly, it's a super amount of juice there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Lots of inertia to overcome. We've got a question from DTS. What happened to your mass spec? Speaking of DIY tools, have you retired that device?
Yeah, it's still, that one's small enough where I didn't really have to take it apart in order to, get it into a cupboard. So it still exists in its form, but I actually haven't used it since the video. There's a lot of really good follow-ups to that one too. There's like a laser ablation technique so that you can do mass spec on solid objects. I mean, that's kind of what everyone wants to do. You don't necessarily have a sample that you can easily put into the machine. So there's this technique where you can blast your sample with a laser and it makes like a little plume of vaporized parts, and then you can do mass spec on those parts.
Is that what like Curiosity does? Do some of the Mars rovers do that?
Actually, I think you're right. I don't know if it's a laser that they use to ablate it, but yeah, they definitely have a mass spec on board, and they are doing it on like the regolith or whatever of the planet they're on, right?
Yeah. We have a question about how people can ship you things. Do you let people ship you things, or are there like safety concerns or what?
Yeah, kind of on an as needed or kind of case by case basis, I guess. Yeah.
Maybe that's one for the DMs.
Yeah, exactly. So my DMs are open on Twitter, and that's probably the best way.
So speaking of the mass spectrometer, what is the DIY tool that you sort of still use the most? Like, is there anything that you still? I think you've built a forge that I see cropping up sometimes, and is there one of those that really shines?
That's a good question. It's actually really tough to build yourself tools that are good enough to use on an ongoing basis like that. I have to admit. But let's see. Let's see. I didn't really build. There is an induction heater that I kind of put together. Oh, that's true. I did make that tube furnace. Yeah, you're right. I actually did build that tube furnace and have used that for further projects, and it still exists, and I still use it. So maybe that's the first one that actually lived long enough to be considered an actual reusable tool.
You had a couple of demos with you. Can you give us a visual on one or two of those?
Yeah,
you did show us the ceramic PCB, but
yeah, so that's still around. So this was like more of these laser cut ceramic parts, and the detail is really good. The smallest hole size you can get down to is I think about 0.5 millimeter or even a little less or something, which is really nice. To be able to do this with a cheap CO2 laser is very helpful.
Oh, that's so small. It looks bigger in the video somehow, but seeing it in real life, it's just incredibly small.
And then on Quartz is actually really cool. This was a discovery. So you can't really cut glass in a laser cutter very well, even with this underwater technique. But Quartz is just really amazing. I've got like a silver conductive stripe sintered on there as well. And you even get the part that comes out of it too. It's really, really sharp detail. Really a nice thing.
Ooh.
And then I brought a blast from the past. This is actually the copper deposited. Copper on plastic the thing that I was talking about that I spent forever doing, and it actually still works. Last night I went poking around in the cupboard and found this, and was surprised that it still works, because I was having a lot of problems with the copper adhesion being pretty poor. So I was expecting this thing to have been, all fallen apart into pieces by now, but it's actually still going. I've just got a little CR2032 there.
Ah, wow. That's so cute.
So that's still working. And then I brought one other one. This is a fun one here. This is
Whoa.
2 quartz crystal oscillators. And so these are these little metal cans that they have in, electronic equipment, an oscillator.
Right.
And the quartz crystal is exposed. I cut the top off, and you can just barely see the quartz crystals in there. It's the round thing with the electrode on there.
Mm.
And I'm running both oscillators. They're both the same frequency, or they're spec'd to be the same frequency, but they're beat together and then amplified. And so I brought a little audio amplifier. Let's see.
Haha, yeah.
And so this will be an audio project here. Hold on a sec.
Love it. Ah!
Okay. So the trick is that quartz is actually very temperature sensitive.
Ah!
And so if you just put your hand near one of them,
No way!
you can hear the frequency change. Or if you blow on it.
Oh my gosh, no way!
So it's a really fun kind of interactive little project where you can blow on the quartz crystals or touch them with your hands, or just sort of get near them, and the heat will change the frequency. And it gives like a really hands-on feeling of how unstable quartz is, because it's so temperature sensitive.
I guess that's why we need RTCs.
Yeah, and so, or temperature controlled. So a lot of times these high-end pieces of equipment have either a temperature compensated or actually an oven temperature controlled quartz crystal. And this is why, is because if you can just blow on it, it makes kind of a fun instrument. You can think of making like a musical instrument that you have to blow on to change the pitch or something.
Yeah, this is blowing my mind. It's like those, those light theremins, but
Yeah,
it's like
exactly.
another level further. Imagine if you made like a light end temperature. It's almost like a living creature at that point, where it'd be like an instrument that
Yeah.
responds to,
You could have different sensors all around, and like you say, it responds to heat and pressure and sort of blowing on it. And so it is kind of a fun sort of interactive thing. And it's really cheap too. You can buy those little quartz oscillators for a couple bucks and just cut the top off, and there it is.
That is so cool. Oh my gosh. Amber asks, have you worked on any public exhibitions other than the water vortex display?
Oh, that's good knowledge from the past. Yes, that was there. So the water vortex display was paired up with this internet-controlled watering can, and yeah, they were installed at San Jose City Hall for a number of years, actually. And my friend and I, so he did, at the time, iPhones were brand new. This is how long ago it was. And the iPhone had this accelerometer. So when you tipped the iPhone over, you could control things with the accelerometer. Back then, this was brand new stuff back then. So we came up with the idea that you could tilt the phone and then have the art exhibit mirror your action. So you tilt the phone over, and then the watering can would go over like in exact synchronicity. And we actually got it working pretty well. You could join like a public Wi-Fi network and then control the art exhibit. And to both of our surprises, I think it ran continuously for about 4 years at San Jose City Hall with only one maintenance break in the entire time.
Wow. So
Yeah.
are there any other ones that you've made or that you're interested in building?
I don't think I've had any other public displays that come to mind. I don't think. But it was a lot of fun, and it wasn't. I have to give credit to the art curator who worked at San Jose City Hall, who actually found us at Maker Faire and wanted to install this thing. I haven't really proactively gone out and tried to create artworks for public, but I think when I get some more time in my life, that would definitely be something I want to do. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I haven't seen that thing myself in quite a long time.
Yeah, I've never actually seen this one before. I've run into a few different cons, and there's been lots of. That's sort of where I became familiar with your work. And jumping off of that, actually, what are the most inspiring things that you've seen at events or cons?
Yeah, I mean, my favorites, Maker Faire, of course, was the first of its kind, and it would really be nice to go back to it. In the later years, Maker Faire changed character quite a bit and became quite a bit larger, and I think it would be fun to do a Maker Faire as it was in 2008 or whatever. if no one else basically starts that, I'm happy to basically help bring back a Maker Faire of 2008. We've talked about it, and so if people who have been to Maker Faire Bay Area, there was always this post party, this after
Yeah,
party at BJ's, and that was like the main
Ring-a-hack.
event for a lot of people. After Maker Faire became pretty large and commercial, if you wanted something that was small and hacky, that's where you'd go, and that became almost like the main event for a lot of people.
Yeah, where it's less like having to explain your project over and over to a bunch of people and more sort of like an exchange. I mean, it is awesome to be able to explain your project over and over to lots of people because that's, part of it. But yeah, just being able to hang out with a bunch of other nerds and kind of like exchange like these ideas and show each other your things. So what kind of stuff did you see at a Bring a Hack that really struck a chord for you?
Bring a Hack, yeah, it was really good. Mostly they're just sort of small things like I just showed here, where it's not a world changing thing, but it's just really nice to see people's creativities coming out, and it's just a nice little thing that you can bring and show off, and it's a pretty relaxed way to do it. I think a lot of like interactive type art shows up at Bring a Hack quite a bit, like things that respond to accelerometer inputs, or you shake it and it does something. Obviously, light candy is really good. All kinds of flashy LED projects.
Light candy.
Everyone loves it, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
I feel like you and John Foote should hang out if you don't already. Sorry.
Yeah.
Staying on the subject. Okay, so you've got all these videos, 10 years worth, almost 11 years worth, 250 plus. Obviously, some of them are going to gain a lot of attention, and maybe other ones will not so much. Is there any videos of yours that you think are really fascinating, but people don't necessarily grab onto them? Anything that's kind of overlooked, and if you could sort of point people in a direction?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It kind of comes down to this thing again of like, do you make content sort of for the audience or sort of for yourself? I mean, usually it's a blend of the two, but it's really an interesting idea. Like, I think for a lot of YouTubers, they just assume that if they get more views or more interaction, that's good. Like that's the result. Like that's
Right.
what you're trying for. But I think other people just create stuff because they feel like it should be created, and they don't really care if anyone is interested in it or
Yeah.
not. And again, it's a spectrum, right? So we're somewhere in the middle where it's like, yeah, I'd like people to do something that people think is good. On the other hand, I'd like to just make videos that I think are good. I
Absolutely.
think some of the videos that I've made, I think the plastic etching or the copper deposition on plastic, in terms of like hours per video produced, that one was way more. I spent hundreds of hours on that project, and I think people appreciated it. But it's also one of those things where it's like, well, what do you do with it? Like if I started a company making copper deposition on plastic, that would be a way that people could use it. But otherwise, it's just a funny little technique. It's like no one's going to patent it, no one's going to sell it, no one's going to license it. It's just one of these little things that just gets thrown out there. So it's I would say if I had to pick a video, it would be that one that required like the most thinking and the most work on my part, and maybe didn't get as many views. What's frustrating as a YouTuber, of course, is people that make super low effort videos and get 10 million views, and it's like, man, this just burns me. It's like, I mean, I understand it makes sense, but
well, it's one of those things where there's like you mentioned this. I love this phrase, light candy. But it's very easy to. Well, I shouldn't say that. But you know, people are drawn to things that give a big visual impact, and sometimes what you're doing is delving really into like the material properties of something, or like the weirdness of it, or look what you can do. And like, I don't have a full application or a completed project or a product that I'm ready to sell, but it's just something really interesting that sort of moves things forward and maybe no one's thought about before. And like Chris here asks about the Quartz oscillator thing, which is obviously not a product. It's not even something that you would like make a stall for and show off, but it's really fascinating. And Chris is asking if that would work as a balloometer. I had to look that up, actually. Turns out it's a
a balloometer is the thing that senses how hot something is by looking at it, basically. So this is how thermal tremors work and how those infrared laser thermometers work. I think it would work as a balloometer. The real trick is that the mass of the balloometer has to be super low if you want it to be useful at all. So if you thinned the quartz down to something ridiculous and made it small, I think it could potentially work. The nice thing is that measuring frequency can be done super, super accurately. You can measure frequency very, very easily. So the readout would be very good. Like it would be very easy to build a sensitive circuit for that. You know, a long time ago, a really long time ago, I made a video where I made a little thermal imager that was totally passive. And I had a germanium lens in front of a screen. And the screen was made of those liquid crystals that they sold in like gift shops of
Ooh.
science museums where, you know, you put your hand on it and it changes color.
Oh yeah.
But I made it really thin. It was like 10 or 20 microns thick. And then the lens would focus the thermal image onto the little screen. And it was totally passive, a totally passive thermal imager. And it worked. Unfortunately, it
Whoa.
wasn't that sensitive. You had to basically be looking at like a soldering iron or a stove, but it did
Right.
actually image it.
Now, I have kind of a random question. I love robots, and I wonder if you could have a robot assist you with one thing in your lab. Maybe something that's, you know, what are the Dr. Carlotta Berry recently mentioned that it's like dirty, distracting, or dangerous things that like are human tasks that could be taken over by robots. What would you build a robot to take over for you? It's a silly question, but I have to
No,
ask.
it's cleaning up is
Oh
something that's
yeah.
always so yeah. Washing it could be labware, washing glass labware, or even just cleaning up everything else in the shop, like sawdust on the ground. Like if I had a little rover or something,
Oh,
yeah, I could definitely see a cleanup robot being really useful.
that sounds adorable. I guess, yeah, they do have rooms and stuff, but what about like a shop vac room? But you know, they're not gonna
Exactly.
deal with, yeah.
Actually,
Um,
yeah, that's not bad. And you know, a lot of people use like compressed air to kind of blow the dust off of stuff. And if you had that sort of like automated so that you could leave the shop and have it blow the dust off of everything and then filter the air, that would actually be pretty cool. That's a good idea.
ooh, I bet a lot of people would be into that for labs
Yeah,
and regular regular
yeah,
life as well. I don't know that I've dusted anything in like recent memory.
yeah,
Uh,
exactly. So that's another problem is that my lab has both woodworking machines and like, you know, clean room-esque type machines, and it's a mess. I mean, there's just dust and stuff everywhere. So in the next incantation of my lab, it'll be separate rooms. What if I get more space?
ooh, yeah. Oh, lab daydreaming.
Yeah,
Such a good.
exactly.
Yeah. So you'd go for more space and you'd have a shop vac Roomba or like a big, even just like an integrated dust blower system and
Yeah,
ah,
exactly.
good stuff. So we're nearing the end here. I have a couple more questions for you, and I've just completely forgotten the one that I was about to ask. Oh yeah, the obvious one. Is there anything you can tell us about that's sort of in the works coming up here? Obviously, maybe not, but maybe you seem like the kind of person who doesn't necessarily keep secrets just for the drama of it. You're very open about things that you share, so I don't know if you can tell us about anything you're working on that you haven't published yet.
Yeah, sure. I think the next video I'm going to do is this idea that if you drink wine or anything out of lead crystal glasses, it gives you lead poisoning. And so this is another one of those, I wouldn't call it an urban legend, but it's one of these like things where no one really knows. Someone will say, well, it's if you only drink out of lead crystal once a month, it's not so bad, but don't do it every day, or don't leave the wine in there for too long or whatever. So originally what I wanted to do was show a atomic absorption spectrometer, either a graphite tube spectrometer or a flame spectrometer, because it's a way of showing like trace metal analysis. Like you really want to know if there's any lead in there down to the parts per billion level.
Hmm.
And so I was basically just using this lead crystal thing as like a demo just to show the spectrometer measuring tiny amounts of lead. But then the more I looked into it, the more I was interested in the actual question of, is there really lead in lead
Yeah.
crystal? Well, I mean, there's definitely lead in there, but does it get into the wine?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So I
yeah.
started buying up lead crystal from a whole bunch of different sources, like
Ah!
made in different countries and different, ages, from different times. And instead of using a spectromic or an atomic absorption spectrometer, which is too difficult to build, I was decided to do it with an easier like color change method. And I don't know the result yet, but I think that'll be the next video. Is this lead and lead crystal? Is it really bad for you?
Ah.
I actually do have a full list of projects. There's probably like several dozen or maybe even 50 projects on my list.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I shared it with my Patreons. It's not really, I didn't mean to just only share it with them. I'd probably post it on Twitter too at some point, but I gave them the opportunity to add comments to the document. So one of the benefits of supporting me on Patreon is you get some input, or at least I'll read your comment on my to-do list, and that'll help me prioritize things a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So the Patreon is here. Everyone, you can follow Ben, obviously, on Applied Science on YouTube. There's your blog spot as well, all kinds of interesting stuff. I think this one with the 10 interesting videos from the past is one that I'm going to have to dig into a lot. You're on Twitter, the Patreon. I also want to dig into these videos that you've published on tools and tips. There's one that seems very adhesives focused. It's very interesting. We've been talking about these other ones that you can find. I'll put them in the video description. And just to wrap up, why don't you tell us what's in each of these GIFs? I just looked you up on Jiffy, or when I was Googling you, this came up. And I'm curious, people seem very fascinated by this. And I remember seeing this as one of your videos, but I forget what it was.
That's cool. I didn't even know such a thing existed. Oh, that is it's a macroscopic model of a DLP chip. So, a projector has a little mirror for every pixel in its entire display. And it literally flips the mirrors back and forth just like that to turn the light on and off. So that's a little 10 by 10 DLP chip. And I put magnets on the back of each of those mirrors and just, used a magnet to flip them around. But
wow.
And so in the real chip, they're actually moved electrostatically, but electrostatics don't work at this scale, at macro scale. So I was just using magnetics. Yeah.
That's incredible. For some reason, I had this image of a digital laser projector having like one mirror in the middle of it, like they do in planetariums and stuff. But the fact that they have one for each pixel, that's so interesting.
They actually have the one mirror ones too, actually. Back in the Valve days, we worked with a company called Microvision that makes a one mirror projector, and it literally scans the laser beam with one mirror, 3 colors, all at the same time. It's a very expensive, fairly difficult way to do it. But they did make little pocket projectors. Like the whole projector was the size of, a cell phone. You could just slip it in your pocket, basically.
Incredible. I didn't know they did that with multicolor ones either. That's super cool. And do you know what you're doing some science on here? This looks like maybe a laser. No, it's not a DIY laser because it'd be enclosed.
I think that was the security tags. And so I always get attracted to kind of like tech that's ubiquitous, but most people don't know how it works. Like those little tags at the store that set the alarm off if you walk out the door before they're deactivated.
Right.
I wanted to know what was in there and how they worked and everything. And that's what that video was, I think.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Such a cool thing. And now I've got, so many more videos that I have to dig into now because I definitely haven't seen your whole catalog. Can't wait to see what you come out with next. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy Tuesday.
Of course, anytime.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next week with another Hackster Cafe. Have a good one. I usually say hack on, but it feels a little cheesy.